Buenos días a todos.
Good morning
Bienvenidos
to everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Guide for Infrastructure Projects during COVID-19, a quick profile related to risk and decision framework. My name is Romina Aramburu, Lead Environmental and Social Officer with IDB Invest. This is a session that's divided into three parts. In the first one, we'll present the scope, the objectives, the content for the COVID-19 guide for the infrastructure sector developed by IDB Invest to support our clients during the pandemic. During the second part of the session, we will listen to some of the experiences of our clients and how they've been implementing these health measures during the coronavirus pandemic. The last section will be available for questions. Just some administrative issues that we want to deal with. First and foremost, we have over 300 people connected, and I want to thank everybody for their participation. Microphones and cameras will remain deactivated during the session. We have simultaneous interpretation available from English to Spanish and from Spanish to English, and you can activate this by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is the first of a series that will take place during the course of this year as part of our knowledge platforms related to sustainability. During the session, you'll be able to send your questions to the email that appears on your screen, sustainabilityweek@idbinvest.org. This session is being recorded and is being shared through our YouTube channel. The first session will involve a presentation from Felipe Esquerra, Chief of the Infrastructure and Energy Division of IDB Invest, Luis Gabriel Acevedo, Head of the Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance Division of IDB Invest, and Tania Barron, Managing Partner and Specialist in Public Health for the Terron Group. Felipe, you have the floor. Good morning. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to take part in this webinar. I think we all know that beyond the health crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a very challenging scenario, both at the global as well as the regional level. So within this context, from the standpoint of the IDB group, we've been working extensively on maximizing our support from our region or from our institution to the region and the Latin American and Caribbean regions. This both in the public and private sectors with sovereign guarantee loans to various loans. And we're not just providing support in financial terms, but we're also trying to provide support through knowledge products such as webinars. And we also wanted to, just as a reference, we have a recently issued report from the IDB related to the microeconomy in the Latin American and Caribbean regions and the policies that need to be applied to be able to combat the pandemic. From the IDB Invest standpoint, our objective is also to work to the extent of our capability, both in terms of financial products as well as in terms of human resources. In that sense, many of you have probably already seen that last week we've seen an increase in our budget for the entire year. And this applies both to our long-term loan capacity and an increase, a very substantial increase in our credit finance lines of credit, which are going from 1.5 to $3 billion. And the idea behind this is to strengthen our short-term loan capability for companies in the region. From the infrastructure standpoint, our vision is that the infrastructure needs in the long term for our region have not changed due to the crisis, and quite the contrary. We believe that infrastructure still needs to play an even more relevant role than what it had prior to the crisis. And so it's a huge objective for our investment purposes, and it's a tremendous engine for the economy. So along these lines, we are firmly committed to supporting our clients during current operations and investments that are being developed at the present time. And we're also trying to provide support in such a way that the investments made, notwithstanding the restrictions that may or may not exist in each country, we want to ensure that these investments continue to be executed, and in this way we can provide greater continuity to these efforts and supporting not only employment but economic activities. On the other hand, we're also focused on continuing our support to our clients based on current mandates that we have and others that we are currently developing in our usual way, and in that sense, in a very natural way. And there's a greater focus being placed on our part on the role that we can play to ensure that we materialize some of these financial closings and to ensure that these operations are in fact executed. We believe that in the short and in the medium term, the important role of multilaterals and especially the role of IDB Invest needs to be as relevant as it has ever been in support of these infrastructure development projects. So clearly, this is much more important in the short and medium term. And this is something that was already a core element in our strategy, which relates to effective mobilization of our resources along different sectors. And so in this sense, the key message that we're trying to convey with regard to our position in terms of infrastructure is that we continue to work with all of our capacity and our lending capacity that we believe that we have available to us and that we consider we will be able to meet our objectives for this year. And we will continue to play a relevant role in supporting these infrastructure projects at the regional level. After the crisis, this will be even more relevant, and that we will continue to provide support to the entire economic network in the region. And with that, Romina, I hand the floor to Gabriel. Thank you, Felipe. Good day to all of you. Thank you for participating in this webinar. I hope that you all find yourselves safely at home with your loved ones and that you are well. As a result of Felipe's remarks, I think that we can all state unequivocally that the coronavirus is a very infectious disease that has developed into a global pandemic. This pandemic has affected all of the regions in the world, including the Latin American and Caribbean regions. And this has caused an unprecedented public health crisis, as well as social and economic crisis. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, we have more than 280,000 confirmed cases with more than 15,000 deaths. Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, and Chile are among the most affected countries. In the face of this enormous challenge, we'd like to call upon all of the key stakeholders to join in our efforts. We believe that our sustainability goals have never been more relevant in terms of providing support and the sustainability for our infrastructure projects with governments. So with this in mind, we believe that the leadership both in the business as well as the government sectors, is absolutely key to be able to continue our efforts. We believe that protecting the health of our workers in the various communities is a common goal that we all share. It's an essential goal. And at the same time, we have to recognize the importance, as Felipe quite correctly stated, of maintaining our activities up to date with all our local governments, national governments, and regional governments. And this is extremely important that we do this with the highest degree of assurances. And it is for that reason that through this discussion, we want to provide support to our clients. We want to provide support for the economies of our member countries as they undergo this recovery process, as they try to overcome the impacts of the crisis. And at the end of this, we expect that we will come back in a much more robust way. I wanted to point out some important elements. First of all, the guide includes a self-assessment tool. It allows you to conduct a risk assessment for making decisions. This does not serve to replace any national mandates or any contractual obligations. It is merely a tool that we offer to support our clients. That's how we see it. Secondly, as I stated previously, this guide does not serve to replace any national, regional, or local mandates. The decision made at the business and project level need to meet the contractual obligations set aside prior to the undertaking of the projects. And I wanted to point out that this guide recommends certain actions that fall in line with the environmental and social sustainability outlined by IDB Invest, and it also meets the performance standards of IFC. With that, I'd like to yield the floor to my colleague so that he can describe how the guide works. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gabriel, and good morning to all of you. As Gabriel was saying, I'm here to explain how this guide works. But before I do that, I think it's important for me to highlight why development projects play such a key role when we discuss the challenges that we face given the COVID-19 pandemic. As you all know, infrastructure projects have very large labor forces that include direct employees, contractors, subcontractors, vendors, and many other types of workers that could be involved within the framework of activities of any project, both in a formal and informal way. These workers can come from various regions in the country or even from other countries. And many times there's a great deal of interaction between workers and local communities as part of the project. So with this large movement of the labor force and with these large amounts of workers, we then face a very high risk for infection. And this would apply to any type of contagious disease, but in particular, with regard to the COVID-19 virus, which is highly contagious. And so this has an impact on not just the health and other actions that need to be undertaken to ensure the protection of the workers, but we also need to consider external risks as well as external health conditions, because the health of the workers as well as the local residents is also connected. And so anything that we do affects both populations, workers and local communities. So the guide focuses on three primary risk areas. It provides a management capacity to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic at every level. We then review the risk within the confines of the project. We analyze the factors that could be influential in terms of the COVID-19 infection capability. And we also need to assess the risk of each of the specific components of the project and that risk as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this leads us to a decision framework. As you can see, this guide shows us 3 steps. The first one is that projects can conduct a self-assessment of their risk related to the COVID-19 virus. So these are elements that are outlined in the guide. And if these elements are considered as part of the self-assessment, then they can move on to the second step. If the conditions are not met, then we recommend that the self-assessment be conducted and that the practices are developed to ensure that these projects have the necessary components to be able to address the COVID-19 issues. Additionally, a review needs to be conducted regarding the risk involved in the environment surrounding the project and their relationship to the COVID-19 virus. So based on the results of these self-assessments, we can ascertain what risk category would be assigned to the project, and we'll delve a little bit more deeply into these components. As I stated during the first step, we have 7 elements that relate to internal management capacity that are addressed in the guide. First and foremost, it's critical that projects have a response plan to COVID-19. They have to have a listing of the actions that will be implemented and the number of practices and actions that are going to be undertaken to avoid any contagion. This will involve both human and financial resources to develop this response plan, and we need to ensure that these plans are adequate to face the scale of the project. We need to monitor the implementation of the plan, and we need to make the necessary adjustments in order to ensure ongoing improvement of the plan. Another critical component for this internal management capacity is to provide training to workers in terms of how to prevent COVID-19, what to do when symptoms arise, and how to deal with them. Other component relates to measures that need to be undertaken. COVID-19 is a very new thing for all of us, and we need to learn how to address the issues related to the disease, and we need to develop the necessary tools that will become a part of this response plan, and we also need to ascertain how we will respond to any situation involving any outbreaks. We've also need to establish some communication channels with local and regional authorities and inform them as to the measures that are being undertaken to prevent any contagion and protect our workers. Another internal management issue that we consider to be very important is that we need a claims process or something similar to ensure that our workers and local communities have a mechanism to express any concerns as to how they believe that COVID-19 is being managed, and this is an integral part of the response capability for the project. Moving on to step number 2, this is where projects can assess their risk level within the confines of their project. These factors many times are not controlled by the project managers, but managers need to be appraised or apprised of the risks involved to be able to respond appropriately to any situations. First and foremost, we need to have an understanding of the current state of the pandemic within the confines or the environment of the project. We need to understand where we find ourselves in that curve. We also need to address these issues through outreach activities, a public prevention campaign. We want to ensure that local residents know how to protect themselves against COVID-19 and so on. We also need testing capability for the detection of COVID-19 infections. If this is not in place, it will be a very challenging problem for us to understand what the current status is of the pandemic at the local level. The health system capability is also important. We need to ascertain how many resources are available locally and whether or not there is the capacity to address critical cases, if there are sufficient ventilators and so on. And an inventory needs to be established for what resources and tools are available to the project. And lastly, we need to understand the degree of vulnerability of the local area to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many times these projects are undertaken in rural areas where we have very high poverty rates, many cases of malnutrition, lack of access to medical care, and this tends to drive infection rates, and therefore the impact that results from the disease could be much greater. So once we understand the local environmental risks, then we can then move on to the project characteristics. First and foremost, we need to consider the scale of the workforce. If we have very large, very dispersed workforces that are located in different places, are much more difficult to manage. Therefore, that needs to be considered. Additionally, we need to assess and review practices that may need to be adjusted to be able to address some of these challenges. This includes using masks and other practices. Worker mobility is also a key component, depending on whether the workers are all grouped up in a single location or whether they're dispersed in different locations. And so if some workers need to be transported to different areas of the project or to a single area, all of this needs to be considered. The likelihood of being able to adapt housing and rest areas accordingly. We also need to review the need of medical personnel that could be available to treat the workers. And additionally, we need to consider the transportation capability in case we have some workers who become sick and require medical attention. We need to assess whether or not there are effective communication channels that will allow us to address issues related to workers and contractors. This is a very big part of the entire equation. And lastly, we need to assess the security risks that might be present in the project area. Given the COVID-19 presence, these risks can be exacerbated, and these are important elements that need to be considered because the presence of the pandemics tends to make everything worse. So this moves us to the third step in the guide. Once we analyze the various categories of risk, we analyze these collectively, and then we could then ascertain what the degree of risk eventually is. There are three categories for risk. And these categories involve managed risk, which includes the following guidelines: meet the government mandates issued with regard to COVID-19, the implementation and continuous improvement of prevention and management measures for COVID-19. And we need to understand that the pandemic is very dynamic. We may be seeing different phenomena where the number of cases tends to oscillate. And so we need to be prepared to be able to address this fact accordingly. The second risk category is one that we call needs attention. So we need to correct any risk factors. We need to close any gaps in our response plan. And we also need to consider mitigation practices that we can use to minimize the impact. A complete stoppage of activities may be a necessary step to be able to deal with some of these COVID-19 problems, especially if it serves to protect the health of workers. So you can consider different activities to potentially reduce the labor force and manage the workers in different ways to ensure their safety. And we also need to identify opportunities to provide local response that could also be beneficial to the project. For example, we could provide equipment supplies or provide support in terms of disseminating information to the public. If the degree is assessed and it is determined that it is not managed, it may be necessary to close the high-risk activities or cease the high-risk activities to be able to develop an adequate response plan. And these are the general recommendations that we provide and that are contained in the guide. Now, this is just a general overview of how this guide works, but I want to leave you with three very important points before I conclude my remarks. First and foremost, the guide is designed to adapt itself to different types of projects and to different types of realities that exist on the ground, depending on the environment. As you can see, the guide is promoting a continuous improvement process, which means that what we're really recommending are activities that can be easily incorporated into the management systems related to the environmental and social conditions that are already existent in the operation. And the usefulness of this guide does not merely refer to the short and medium term when we talk about this COVID-19. We know that COVID-19 isn't going to go away very soon. It's going to be with us for a good amount of time. And so what the guide also affords us is another opportunity for us to manage these systems. And this will allow projects to not only address issues related to COVID-19, but other contagious diseases. So with that, I want to yield the floor to Romina.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for such a clear explanation. On our part, in IDB Invest, we're very excited for having developed this guide, and we hope that it can prove to be very useful for all of us. Now we have the privilege of being able to hear what some of our clients have to say. They've been developing infrastructure projects, really major projects in the region. We would like to welcome Marcelo Feldberg. He is the CFO for the Americas of BT World, and he deals with Puerto Posorga besides other ports, so he manages all these ports. Robinson Miranda is the Environmental, Social, and Sustainability Director of the Durango Hydroelectric Plant in Colombia. Edison Candela, Director for Quality, Environment, and Risk Prevention of the 4G Cocoa Routes Highway in Colombia. And Pedro Orcajo, Construction Manager of Rutas del Este, and they're also managing the 2 and 7 national routes in Paraguay. Thank you very much for your participation. I would like to kick this off with Marcelo. Marcelo, we are delighted to have your participation and your vision of sustainability as CFO for the Americas for a transnational company. Marcelo, what have been some of the actions undertaken by DP World in Posorja and Pasor to ensure the security and health in operations and to be able to safeguard the people who work in these ports? Thank you, Romina. I will speak in English.
Port operations are strategic services, and all of our terminals in the region remain open and continue to operate despite restrictions in several countries, including, for example, Ecuador in Posorja, and despite curfews and others. I won't have the time here to go through the whole protocol and actions and everything that we have done and we are doing, but I want to highlight some relevant comments. The first one, it's our previous planning for unforeseen emergencies worked very well. We made adjustments in our business continuity plan and protocols, but overall, the plan implementation was done to our satisfaction. And when you look into the IDB guide, you would see that there is a high correlation, strong correlation between actions that we have done and most of IDB recommendations. The second thing that was, the second point that was very, very important was our team. Seasoned leadership, skilled labor, and understanding the importance of keeping the port terminals open were key in this whole process. Another thing was regular communication within the whole organization globally. So everything is posted, everything is used in our toolbox talks in the morning or during the shifts. Everything gets emailed, everything is recorded, documented, and shared. So there is a common understanding within all terminals that we can gain from experience, knowledge, and actions. There is a very strong acknowledgement of our corporate social responsibility and the importance that we support the communities around, in our case, Sorge in Ecuador and Santos in Brazil, Amberport. Also very, very important, we had preventive talks that were held with the port, sanitary, health authorities, unions, workers. We explained, we disclosed all of our actions. We coordinated initiatives. We provided support. And with that, we give comfort to the labor and to all stakeholders of not only the importance to keep the ports open, but also to give the necessary adequate conditions to work. In short, and I think this is a major achievement, we had zero so far, touch wood, zero mortality in our business. Only 6 employees tested positive in a total workforce of almost 9,000 people. Now, if I still have some time, I can list some of the actions that we did. I already mentioned that we did a quick review of our safety and operations protocol. Third-party labor and suppliers restrictions were implemented. Only essential third-party suppliers and contractors were formally notified about requirement and access. No vessel crew was allowed to come on shore and had no contact between stevedores and the crew. We tried to keep it contacts very much to a minimum. Access control, temperature control, symptoms checks, and all of these checkpoints were done outside of the terminals, including the truck drivers. They're coming with the containers, the ferry in the case of Amberport. We provided PPE, cleaning, disinfecting materials to every single worker, kits with masks, hand sanitizers, instructions to keep them safe at home and office. We provide transportation to the workers to pick up and drop close to their homes, totally segregated transportation. We went and we've been working remote for as long as possible in all possible activities. There is a general cleaning, disinfection policy implemented with regular fumigation. So all of this together, I mean, I don't have much time and I want to let my colleagues here be able to speak as well, but all of this together contributed, as I said, to touch wood, so far, zero mortality in our business.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Voy a pasar a Robinson.
Let me turn to Robinson. Irutango is a mega project that has also had the the experience of responding to a natural emergency prior to COVID-19. Could you please tell us what is the current context in the area of the Lituango project? How has the project been prepared in order to prevent transmission and spread of the virus, and the capacity that the project has in order to take care of the workers that might have symptoms? I would also like to know how you're communicating, coordinating, and cooperating with the authorities and with health facilities in the area, local health facilities. Robinson, you have the floor. Thank you, Rovina. Greetings to you and to all participants. As you know, and as you said it, Nauituango had a situation 2 years ago. It was an unfortunate situation for the project, but fortunate for the current issues with COVID, because that has strengthened us. I must say that in Antioquia, which is the hydroelectrical project is located in a specific region in Antioquia, we don't have any case of COVID in those two regions. In Antioquia, we have 450, but in the two regions, and specifically in the municipality where we operate in Ituango, we don't have any single case of COVID. The issue is that Antioquia is being considered as a successful example of the management of this pandemic, with 6 deaths only in total. But there is no case of COVID in the project or in the adjacent municipalities to this Ituango hydroelectrical plant. The project, as I said initially, unfortunately had an event 2 years ago, but fortunately regarding the issue of COVID, it trained us, it prepared us for this. We immediately realized that we had the first positive case of COVID-19 in Colombia, and as soon as we found out that, we activated the plan, the emergency and contingency plan in Ituango, and it was an indicator showing that the measures have been taken in order to take care of the situation. In that context, then, we have clearly undertaken several actions. The first one of these is that people with weakening and underlying conditions and people older than 60 years should stay at home. Another situation is that we promoted work at home, telework, from an administrative point of view that doesn't necessarily require to go to the project and be in that area or its environment. Another important situation is that we immediately activated a list online so that every day and continuously workers would be reporting their health conditions, and in order to have clear statistics on how the development of the pandemic was taking place should anything happen. And last but not least, we designed and we implemented a very strict protocol, very much in line with the policies of the national government on how to control, how to follow and take care of this contingency. All the issues of masks, permanent hand washing, sanitizing workplaces, and disinfecting transportation, everything is included in the protocol. And we even decided and determined how to act should we find a COVID-19 case. We have two health centers where we have outpatient services. We have cases of accidents, minor accidents, and also some other cases, emergency cases, but essentially we have initial care services. We don't have any emergency services or hospitalization. For that, should that case arise, what we've established is a chain with the municipalities. So should we have an accident in the project, we can immediately transfer our people to the other centers, health centers. We have two centers at a very primary level, healthcare services in our area. So should we need anything else, we take them to these other centers. We have 8 ambulances, out of which 7 are basic and 1 is more sophisticated. If we identify a positive case or some signs that one of our workers of the 7,000 that we currently have, if they show some of the symptoms, what we do is to transfer this person to the high-level health center that is closest to the project. Last but not least, I must say that we've kept permanent contact with municipal authorities and community leaders, essentially, in several ways. Number one is that close to the 7,000 workers that we have, when we need to have a shift, turnover and handover of a shift, you have to go to the rest area after a month and a half. And so we notify the municipal authority and we let them know what the protocol is in order to exit the project, the mode of transportation, so that they can come into the communities, so that the municipal mayor and his staff will determine who the staff is in order to make sure that they're in the best health conditions possible. We've also established the workshops with the communities in order to show them and how the project handles COVID, what are the protocols that we have in the project, so that we can come to a common understanding on how the project, in case we identify a positive case, how the project acts towards this person. Also, as a community action, public marine companies, the builder, the contractor in this project, through the SEM Foundation, we're currently providing medical inputs and supplies to these municipal authorities because they face certain deficits regarding inputs and supplies. We're also helping, as I said previously, the community in order to understand the phenomenon and how to protect our people in the community. Fortunately, in the project, we haven't had one single case of COVID. We have a clearly established protocol acknowledged by Colombian health authorities and also vetoed by Colombian health authorities. And we're in the process of continuing then in a successful and safe way without any problem. One of the points that has to be considered is that the contingency 2 years ago got us with a very good preparation, very good training in order to be able to deal with this contingency of COVID-19. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robinson. Very interesting what you're sharing with us. Let me now give the floor to Robinson. And in the project of Ruta del Cacao, the cocoa route highway, this is a project that crosses several communities. It's a linear project. We'd like to hear from you, Robinson, how you're dealing with community relations, with the communications with these populations that live all along the project. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the coordination and the interaction that you have with local authorities and with health authorities with whom you interact. Thank you very much, Romina. Special greetings for all participants. Initially, I'd like to give you some information about the project. This communicates the city of Bucaramanga with Barranca del Mega. We're talking about a linear project of 150 kilometers, and it is located in Santander towards the northeastern part of Colombia. And the path goes to 6 municipalities in this specific case. In order to deal with COVID, the Department of Santander, unfortunately, has 40 confirmed cases only. And out of the 6 municipalities that participate in the project, only 1 has 6 cases confirmed. So this way, I shared this information with you just to give you a description of the project. We had to stop activities in keeping with the guidelines stipulated for the quarantine by the national government, and later on, we had the possibility of reactivating our activities, and for that, we faced several challenges. Amongst these, to establish a protocol, a very clearly structured protocol, so that this would give confidence not only to our workers, but also to municipal authorities and to neighboring communities. This is a huge challenge because different from other projects that we have, it is taking place in one specific area, but we had 150 kilometers of very specific interventions where we had to interact with the different communities and to make sure that the protocols and the procedures established were met and complied with by the different workers and contractors in keeping with the agreement reached. As one first thing, what we did was to establish the protocol and resorting to all the tools that had been provided by the government through the different ministries. We also used another tool, which is the guide that was given to us by IDB Invest, and another guide for speedy fast self-assessment also provided by the IDB team, and so to determine the level of risk that was posed by the project and the difficulty and challenges faced, and to clearly establish a very good plan of action which would enable us to rest assured in the alignment of these activities. With these very well-established tools, we begun with the analysis of working with the department and municipal authorities, the ministries of health. We shared with them the protocol. We told them what the strategies were, which ones had been established in order to carry out these activities, and to make sure that we were following certain protocols. The authorities reviewed the protocols, they offered some recommendations, and they adopted those recommendations. And after that, we began with other strategies. It was, in fact, a challenge because it is outside the main cities, and therefore the capacity, the communication ability in order to consider internet coverage, the cell phone telephony with the communities, and by having another restriction and not being able to communicate with the communities face to face, we had to devise a very interesting logistic prior to the meetings in order to make sure that the community leaders would be able to have access to the network and to be able to hold the meetings and for these meetings to be successful. We worked this out in the best way possible in keeping with the protocols. They also gave us the possibilities to improve these. They offered some recommendations that would make them feel better at the beginning of all these activities of the project. We considered their suggestions. We activated those agreements and those protocols. And as part of these, I can say that one of the things that they suggested was that workers should not come into the communities. They should only follow the highway, the road. They should never come close or buy products in these communities, that they could, everything be bought online or by telephone and takeout in order to activate the trade in the area. And if a worker came from another department where they had a high level of contagion, these workers had to arrive and spend the quarantine, go through the test, and after the test, once they were found negative, they could join all the activities. So it was n number of agreements that were established with the communities, and it allowed us to rest assured to be calm and for workers to be able to join the project. Something else that we did with the municipal authorities and the national regional authorities is that we did not begin the work 100%. We started with 25% of the activities and 25% in the number of workers, obviously, out of the total that we had. For example, in February we had 2,292 workers, and we began activity with 407 workers. And this was with the intention of guaranteeing, that is to say, ensuring that the guidelines and the protocols would be fully met, that little by little we would be implementing other protocols and bring about a culture. This has to do with the culture of workers to make sure that everything was working 100%, following the protocols and the plan. And once we began the activities with that 25%, we started creating additional activities and obviously to increase the number of workers in the area. And little by little, slowly, and that gave us the possibility of understanding that things were being done adequately and that we were following the protocols. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Edinson.
I'd like to yield the floor now to Pedro, but we are also joined from, or Pedro joins us from Paraguay. Pedro, I wanted to ask if you could share a little bit with us how you've been coordinating activities between the concession, the building company, contractors, and the building of this linear highway project that is a large-scale project in your country. What challenges have you faced and what measures have you undertaken? Thank you very much, Romina. Cordial greetings to everyone. Before I answer your question, I'd like to discuss a little bit about how the situation is looking in Paraguay. Paraguay had a problem earlier in the year of dengue outbreak, and this affected our health system in a very important way. As a result, our government instituted a very rigorous response. I think that fact has allowed us to contain the spread of the pandemic in a very effective way. To date, I think that the number of confirmed detected cases is on the order of 231 cases. We've had 10 people die from the coronavirus pandemic. And of the 100 of those 431 confirmed cases, 135 of them have already recovered. So I think that the measures that we undertook have been very timely and very effective in Paraguay. In terms of our project, which is a design, financing, construction, operation, and maintenance project, involves more than 150 kilometers of construction in our country. And in terms of the response that we've had to the COVID-19 issue, from the outset, we created a protocol, a follow-up program that was geared towards avoiding any propagation of the disease. This is something that we shared with the Public Works Ministry, who also developed their own protocol. And after a number of meetings with government officials, we were able to conduct public works projects with the adequate safeguards in place. I wanted to highlight that the measures undertaken by the government included protecting or restricting mobility for citizens, and we prioritized only those priorities deemed to be essential. So through these protocols, as we stated, we shared our protocols with the ministry, and they developed their own additional protocols in conjunction with the health ministry. In our case, there was some concern among our project workers because there was a great deal of panic with regard to the presence of the disease. So we undertook a number of activities that included training, outreach, and discussed various factors, including the symptoms that are typical for the disease. And so we afforded them the necessary information that allowed them to self-assess their condition and determine whether or not they had the symptoms that pointed to possible infection. Additionally, we also provided training on prevention and other activities to face this challenge. As I stated, this is a design contract as well as a construction, operation, and maintenance project. So we have 4 different phases that are covered by this project. Now we also have direct work that is conducted in our offices, and one of the things we've done here in terms of conducting the necessary verification related to temperatures, we've also instituted personal care practices, maintaining their workspace clean, using disinfectant gel and other cleansers. And wherever we've been able to, we've tried to impose these practices. So we maintain in our various common work areas the social distancing standards that are mandated by our health ministry. On the other hand, we also have operation and maintenance, and this involves different types of transportation equipment and road equipment, and we've instituted the same procedures. We take the temperature of all the workers that arrive on the job site. We use face masks. We instituted a frequent hand washing protocol. Additionally, we've conducted disinfection campaigns in all our facilities, including office spaces. And in these areas, we've also used a shift schedule in order to avoid any large concentration of workers. It's clear that we've seen a very large drop in the traffic of vehicles, which has been very favorable for our workers, especially those that have to be transported to the work sites. And this has afforded us the opportunity to work on a varying shift schedule. So far, we have not yet detected a COVID-19 case on any of our job sites or in any of the locations that we're currently developing. When referring to the actual project, in addition to the practices that I've already mentioned involving workers, we've also adopted personal protection practices and the protocol that we follow at least once a week in terms of sanitizing and disinfecting different types of equipment, including buses that we use for personnel transportation. We've also instituted social distancing in work facilities so that we only have a single person per table in common eating areas and other areas. And all of these have been working very well. And they've also afforded us the opportunity to ensure that our workers feel confident in the conditions that they're working under. In addition to some of the directives issued by the ministry, as well as the general prevention mechanisms that they've instituted, we've also adopted many protocols that refer to the actual workplace. So all of our contractors that travel to the work sites are subject to the same health and sanitation controls. When they arrive at the job site, we have medical teams there in the various camps that ensure that each person that arrives at any job site is subjected to a specific medical protocol. And this includes taking their temperature and other things. And this has allowed us to ensure that none of our workers has exhibited any of the symptoms so far. We do have, quote, some issues, not at the present time, but there is a likelihood or possibility of supply problems if these measures instituted by the government are made more rigorous. Right now, we're undergoing a phase where they're loosening the lockdown requirements. Some smaller businesses are beginning to open, and we believe that many of these protocols have been very effective at the national level to impede the spread of the pandemic. We have many workers that come from external areas, and so they have to undergo a quarantine process, and we believe that at a regional level, we've been able to control the spread of the disease very well. It's possible that if the measures are loosened and there's no significant uptick in the propagation of the disease, then we might be able to go back to business as usual at the project facilities and job sites. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro. Once again, I wanted to thank all of you for your participation. It's been a very enriching experience to be able to hear firsthand how you've all been managing this contingency, this emergency, and this health situation in different projects located throughout the region. I think this is extremely valuable information for everyone. And additionally, I think that it's very valuable to have more knowledge about initiatives undertaken by both the public and private sectors, not only as a result of the health crisis, but also as part of the process to recovery. So we're just a few minutes past the hour. We're going to try and maybe answer one or two questions in the remaining minutes that we have left. This is the email that you can send your question to. And as we wait for any questions to come in, I'd like to inform you that we're going to collect all of the questions that we receive and try to answer them, if not live, but we will answer your questions via email. And we again want to thank you for your participation. Additionally, I want to remind you that this recording will be available in our YouTube channel, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email following this event with a link to that recording. We have two questions that we can begin with. This question is posed to Gabriel. It's an institutional IDB Invest question. Gabriel, the question is as follows. How do you relate the guidelines that are included in the COVID-19 guide that was developed by IDB Invest, and how do they align with the environmental and social policies that IDB has included in their sustainability policies? Well, thank you for the question. As I explained at the beginning of my presentation, there's a very close correlation between the guide and our policies. Primarily, I can point to the performance standards, also policies related to mitigation and impact of these situations. Number two, it addresses the condition or the work conditions of our workers. And then number four relates to the health and safety of communities that are located near job sites. So this is very closely aligned with our policy, and these are guidelines that are included in the guide. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gabriel. We have another question here that is directed to Marcelo from IDB World, or DP World, excuse me.
I would say that a very old but very actual quote: prepare for the worst and pray for the best. Follow the guidelines and advice from expert professionals, and avoid following recommendations that have no technical or analytical support or background, and work very closely in unison with all of the stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Con esto hemos llegado a la hora de nuestra primera sesión de
With this, we've run out of our time with our first section of this webinar. I just wanted to mention that we're going to be offering other webinars using this new platform, which is Zoom. We're very happy to have had your participation. We have more than 290 people that are joining us today, so I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I hope that this session was useful to you. I think it's been very enriching to be able to listen to different perspectives, different situations located throughout the region. On the screen, you can see the link whereby you'll find the guide for infrastructure projects during COVID-19. And on Monday, May 11th, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 with our board of directors. And on May 18th, we've scheduled that day to discuss the guide in terms of infrastructure projects and agricultural projects for COVID-19. So once again, I want to thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.